Hello, everybody, and welcome to this, I have to check, 23rd talk in this series on Buddha nature through Maitreya and Asanga's text, known as the Mahayana Uttara Tantra Shastra or the Ratnakotra Vibhanga. So, as always, we start with this very, very necessary, very important, inspiring moment when we forget everything else and focus 100% on our bodhisattva commitment, on the longer term, on this life as part of many, many lifetimes in which we are on a special journey to this enlightenment that we are starting to study in our present chapter. We take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and in the community of most noble minds. From this moment on until we reach the very heart of enlightenment. Through our practice of generosity and all six transcendent virtues, may we reach total awakening and every enlightened quality to be able to truly help sentient beings so lost in samsara. May each and every one of those beings be well. May they live long. May they be healthy and well provided for. May they have good friends and find respect. May they live in places of peace, places of plenty, and most of all, may they practice Dharma. May they each create the causes for these good circumstances to be their wealth in future lives. May they be free from suffering and from creating causes of future suffering. May they discover the natural, sacred well-being totally beyond suffering and attain the great equanimity that is free of closeness or distance from anyone. Dhyata shame shamavati shameta shatru Om kuri mara jite karota kiyori tejawati olayane Vishudane male malapana ye kupure kaka grase grasana Om mukhi paramuki amuki shamadavane Sawa graha bandhanane gridva Sawa bhava pravadina vimukta marapasha savitva buddha mudra Anudgatita sava mare butsarita parishuddhe bhiga shantu sava mara kama. Glorious Guru, source of all blessing, ever present above our heads on lotus and moon seat, through your immense kindness, ever sustain us, that the blessings of body, speech, and mind flow from you, and we are one. Thank you. So here we are in this text, which is part of the Shastras explaining Lord Buddha's teachings to us. It's a very important Shastra. It's the foundation stone of the later developments of the Mahayana tradition in India and then later on in Tibet. Very, very important text for the Tibetans and also for the Zen traditions, the Chan traditions. It is the text about the prime truth of everything, that we call in English these days Buddha nature, but that's a very limited translation. It's about the basic nature of everything and everyone. So this is the prime text for all the Mahayana traditions, for all the Tibetan traditions. And as you know, it's in three main parts: the good beginning, just the title, the homage, the good end, the dedication, the main body of the text in the middle, the good middle. That's in two main parts: the result to be achieved, and the second part, the reason, the causes for achieving it. First part, the result, are 3 chapters on Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. That's what needs to be established, achieved. And the last 4 chapters, Buddha nature as the prime cause for achieving that. And then enlightenment, Buddha qualities, Buddha activity as the secondary conditions, secondary causes for achieving it. So we finished our Buddha nature chapter about the prime cause, the main cause, the genetic cause for becoming Buddha Dhamma Sangha. And now we're looking at the supporting conditions. And the first is that other people got enlightened before us. They've shown us that we don't just have a potential, but that potential can actually be made into Buddha Dhamma Sangha. We can become Buddha, teach the Dharma, and create a Sangha. You, me. And you will do, although you might not quite believe that yet. I wonder how many people here actually do feel themselves as a future Buddha. You should do. You are. You will be. It's what all this is about. And you better believe it. And then you'll do yourself a wonderful favor. So anyway, the fact that others got enlightened, and in particular in our age and time, Shakyamuni, Siddhartha, got enlightened, taught the Dharma in its completeness, established a Sangha that still exists and that will persist for many centuries from now. That's the example for us. And then we have closer examples alive now who are bodhisattvas well on the way to that. It's not just a quantum achievement, somebody got enlightened. So we're in this chapter about enlightenment, and we could just dive into it the way I was taught by the different khenpos, and blah, 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 this point, next point, next point. But I do think some context is very important so that you get more feel for it. So let's start not with the traditional explanations from the various commentaries on this text, but with some, how can you say, treasures that Ken has gleaned from the various Rinpoches, khenpos over the last 50 years, and from my own experience and studies and so on. And I think to understand enlightenment, we need first to understand Buddhism as it exists in the world, And that's a huge topic. And still being researched. But you need to be aware. What have we got at the moment? We've got Theravada Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, Chan Buddhism, various schools of Zen Buddhism, Pure Land Buddhism, and so on. All of these represent Buddha's teaching, claim to be authentic Buddha teaching, and each of you will have your own impression of Tibetan Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, and how all of that came about, and the message it has for us today is not just interesting, I think it is very vital that we, as whatever we are, Westerners, modern people, coming to Buddhism as it's been preserved in different countries, pretty much in isolation. I can remember the 1970s, 80s, when Buddhists first started coming together. They were so scared of each other. You've got the Tibetans and the Theravadas and the Zen, and they all think we've got the right one and they're weird one way or another. And they're coming together around a table. There was an awful lot of standoff, suspicion, ignorance. They just didn't know what was going on. They'd heard things within their own isolation. They were in countries which were isolated, which were sort of up to here in their own tradition with a tiny margin on the top of some knowledge of other traditions. Interfaith meetings were really interesting in terms of psychology. They say in terms of nationalities, you've probably seen it, different nationalities have a natural body distance from each other. So when you put Americans in the same room with Italians, the Italians are always getting closer and the Americans are always backing off, and so on, because and it's just natural distance. So we've gone beyond that now. There's a lot more knowledge. There have been so many international conferences, meetings, and so much has happened. That's good. But we do need to understand for this chapter. Why? Because it's about enlightenment, and we are regular human beings. So for us, you say, the easiest way to think of enlightenment is of somebody getting enlightened. Somebody does something, they are enlightened. I don't know for you, but I think that's generally the easiest way to understand it. So first we need to, I think, not today, because it's a topic that might take you years to get some grip on, but to understand what happened. There's what's called Northern Buddhism, mainly Mahayana, Tibetan, Zen, Chan, Pure Land. It basically was in the north of Asia. And then Southern Buddhism, which is rooted in Theravada Buddhism, very widespread. And for whatever reasons, we can't say fortunately or unfortunately, they got to the West first. The Theravadas went west before all the others. If you look like the London Buddhist Society and so on, and it's all to do with empire, exposure to different Buddhist traditions. And you need to understand that a message that was around for a long time, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that the Theravada was the pure and the original form of Buddhism. And they got the real deal. They're the real McCoy, and all of the rest was a later development. That myth was around. It's not true. There's no historical reason for that, unless you go to the 12th century of our era, which is about, 17 centuries after the Buddha, and a radical king in Sri Lanka, who was what we call these days a Buddhist fundamentalist. So in Sri Lanka, you had Theravada Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, and Vajrayana Buddhism. Some monasteries practiced, Nichiren Razik practiced Vajrayana. Some were Mahayana tradition. Some were Theravada. And in some monasteries, people practicing those three lived together. It worked, as it had worked in India. But Buddhism, by that time, was disappearing in India. India had been invaded. Hinduism had taken a big leap forward. So this king, who was very radical, Theravada, he simply said, well, anyone who's not Theravada, they either convert or they leave the island. And because of his own Theravada teachers, he propagated the idea Theravada is the original one, it's the root, it's the stem, the trunk from which all the others developed later, and the others were a bit sort of wonky. They're not the real deal. Just a second, I have to do something with my screen. This doesn't work. Good. Yeah. So that was it. People either all became Theravada or they had to leave Sri Lanka. And then there was a lot of missionary work which ended up with southern Asia becoming Theravada. Theravada was just one of many, many schools in India. There were at least 18 major minor schools. The other 17 didn't survive. So Theravada with its own beliefs. So what is true is that what they hold of the Buddha's teaching is the basic message. The basic message that all the other traditions also have. The common message. They've got that. But they weren't the original. And so what happened in the 1990s, and let's not spend too much time on it, but it's so important, is that in Afghanistan and Pakistan, early Sanskrit texts were found which showed that any idea that Theravada was kind of the one trunk from which the Mahayana developed, that myth was out the window. It was obvious that the Mahayana schools, the Sanskrit traditions, had existed from the earliest times. So there are two theories about the development of Buddhism, basically. One's called the single trunk, where there was the basic teaching of the Buddha, that then later developed into Mahayana. That idea is gone now. And the other is called the tangled bush. It's like a bush where lots of roots grow out the ground at the same time. I can't think of an actual example in nature. Those of you who know gardening will know, but not one trunk, but lots and lots coming out the ground. So that from the time of Buddha onwards, all the traditions developed in different places, different people. So anyway, you need to know that as a basis for an important point today about enlightenment, that there are two stories of enlightenment. Now, if we take it very simply and wrongly, there's the Hinayana story and the Mahayana story, or the Theravada story and the Mahayana story. But that's not really how it is, because both stories exist in both traditions. I hope this is making some sense. So the first story is the story of the Buddha, the one that we all learn, born. Last week we had celebrating the conception of the Buddha. Born a prince, grows up in luxury, sees suffering, leaves the palace, practices asceticism for 6 years. At the age of 35, gets enlightened. First doesn't teach, then teaches the Dharma for 45 years, passes into nirvana at the age of 80. It's the story of somebody getting enlightened, and it's a story that anyone can relate to. In some ways, Buddha's exceptional, but it's a story you can relate to. As somebody got all the riches, and that's not it. Does all the spiritual practices, meditates, practices asceticism, that's not it. Finds the middle way, is enlightened, teaches it. You can tell that story to almost anyone, and it will click, it will make some sense, and many people it will inspire. And so we have that story in Mahayana Buddhism, and it's said to be the story we should tell to people who are not Buddhist educated, because people can relate to it. So we have that story of the Buddha's enlightenment, but it's not how we as educated Buddhists understand the Buddha's enlightenment. As we saw last week, all of that is it's like a show. So that there is a story that people can relate to. What we understand, because we are educated Buddhists, is about the Buddha going through the 5 stages of the path, what you can go through as a human, developing mindfulness, developing meditation, and so on. In the end, reaching the first bodhisattva level, no more self, no more rebirth because of karma, going through the 10 bodhisattva levels. At the end of the 10th level, in a totally sublime plane of existence, reaching enlightenment, which makes ripples through the universe. Part of those ripples is the manifestation of Buddha on our planet to teach the Dharma. It comes from a very, very, very high source that's unimaginable for us. Can you nod if this is making any sense? Yeah, it's okay. So I'd like to give, not from the classical teachings, from me, just personally, a couple of examples about what I mean. Silly, simple examples to give you some idea. It's like in the last, 10, 15 years, you've seen in the world a whole wave of far-right politics, right? And although in each country you've got the people who are making it happen and the politicians and so on, it's more than that, because it's just like a wave that's happening. When I was 18, 19, 20, 21, there was what happened in the 1960s, a wave of love, a wave of something quite special. And so I was born just after the First World War. When I walked to my primary school, half of the buildings around me were rubble. It was London after the Blitz. We were rationed. It was, the whole world was post-war. You can see it in films, but to have lived through it is to have felt what the first half of the 20th century was like. It was war, First World War, Second World War, countries fighting each other for domination, industrial forces, money behind it. And then there was this wave of an idea that we can all live together. We can help each other. We can live a life based on love, not on material acquisition. And although that happened in different places, through different people, in many different ways, there was something greater behind it. It was a wave that came from somewhere and swept across. It lasted 5, 10 years. And that really changed life. It changed the whole world. Not forever, didn't last, but it was like a wave. When you see a wave, you look at these tsunamis. The last one we had, it started way up there in the north of the Pacific, and it just carries on and carries on. And it hit the California coast and Hawaii and other places. It's a wave. So now that we understand how big materially this cosmos is, we can be mind-boggled at the Buddha's teaching. You know how big this universe is. Our planet's part of our solar system, which is part of the Milky Way, which is a tiny, tiny bit of something so big we can't imagine it. So the Buddha's teaching was that our planet is part of a family of planets, about a billion of them, which are like the stage where our different lives reincarnate. It's like actors going from theatre to theatre. Big theatre, small theatre, advanced theatre, primitive theatre. That seems so extraordinary. Even when I started studying. And of course now we've got so much we know about the material universe. And then if you think what we know about it, this material universe, I know I keep going back to this, but I think it's a wonderful example. All these NASA photographs of galaxies and so on. They look wonderful, but you'll never see them. They take photos of the infrared, the ultraviolet, all the radiation, and they make it visible for us by changing the wavelengths. We have so much more idea of what's out there that we will never experience with our eyes, with our ears. That's in other parts of the spectrum and so on. How vast the cosmos is, and how things like solar flares on the sun a couple of days later make our weather change. So all of this just to help broaden our mind, to understand that when a bodhisattva on the 10th level, in that sublime, vast state, way beyond ego, way beyond a person, their minds are one. They don't have an individual mind, a me. They're part of everybody. From the first bodhisattva level. No me, no persona, none of that delusion. There's everything and everybody that we are one little fiber of. So when that gets to the 10th, pure, almost totally pure bodhisattva level, and enlightenment happens, the wave that goes through these billion worlds associated with our worlds makes people experience Buddha, makes the Dharma emerge in people's mind. And they each experience a story of meeting Buddha, but in different ways. This is what we're talking about in this chapter. So there's the ordinary story of somebody, a prince who gets enlightened that anyone can relate to. And there's the wise person's story about a journey where bit by bit we shed what we're going to study in the first 2 of the 7 sections of this chapter about what enlightenment is and its causes, where bit by bit we shed jealousy, pride, anger, dualistic thinking, and they go. And then the purity of everything becomes clearer and clearer. So I hope that helps. Now what's interesting in this sort of line of thought is that for the first couple of 100 years after the Buddha, there were no representations of Buddha. No statues, no pictures. Buddha was this extraordinary presence that affected people. So the Buddha was represented by a footprint, by the wheel of Dharma, sometimes by a lotus flower. No statues, no images. There was this, how can you say, acknowledgement that this universal blast of truth we call Dharma had made more than something like 500 people, arhats, had been experienced in all sorts of different ways by different people. Then the artists came along. And bit by bit, something happened. So when you look back at the history, we see that after 200-300 years after the Buddha, something happened all the way through India. Until about, well, it's hard to put a date on it, a couple of 100 years BC. Spirituality in India, Hinduism, Buddhism, was ideas, meditation, philosophy. There wasn't deity worship. That came in. When you look at the big texts like the Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata, they come around year 0, century before, century after. Spirituality was not devotional. Something happened. Devotion came in, and with devotion came representations. And if you look at the history, it's got a lot to do with Greece and Greek art and Alexander the Great and his conquests and the impact of that on so many areas. If we look at some of the oldest images in India, like in the Ajanta caves, and much later, Ellora, but Ajanta is probably the oldest. The images that you see, they look like Buddha images, but they're actually images of what they call the Bodhisattva, Buddha's previous lives. So anyway, this is a huge topic. I think it's very helpful if you understand something of it for understanding this topic of enlightenment. What exactly enlightenment was. So in the Theravada system, then they have the Jataka stories, the past lives of the Buddha. If you look at Buddha's main disciples like Shariputra, Mahamoggallana, then it says in a past life, Buddha says, you were this person, this happened, this story. We get many past life stories of Buddha, his main disciples. So they have the story of the Bodhisattva, what they call the Bodhisattva. In the Theravada system, over many, many hundreds of lifetimes, they have the story of how Buddha first took the vow to become enlightened with the previous Buddha. So this story of a long journey over many lifetimes exists in the Theravada system, but for teaching ordinary people who have no meditation experience, who don't know, who can't imagine what samadhi is like, what a peaceful, pure, connected mind is like, what real metta, loving kindness, being part of everybody is like, and so on, then it's a story that makes sense. But they have the story of the Bodhisattva. And we have that in Mahayana, same story. And then our great teachers, like the first Jamgon Kongtrul, who said, when you're talking with people who can't understand that, then in the Mahayana and in the Vajrayana, we should present the story of Buddha as Prince Siddhartha, who leaves the palace and so on and so on, and who gets enlightened. But for us, if you are studying, then we should know that the Buddha got enlightened on the 10th Bodhisattva level, not in this world, not as Prince Siddhartha. It happened before. And it caused the 12 main deeds of the Buddha to manifest. So we'll look at that in one of these chapters. Now, just to conclude this Ken's introduction, which I hope hasn't bored you too much, but I think is necessary, is to tell you that what we're studying is very advanced. And I remember, and I was checking this out with Katya, when we first studied with Khenpo Sotim in 1978, and we got to these teachings, this text, he said, this is very advanced. He said, in Tibet, most monastics don't study this text. When we get to those who do study, who go to the Shedra, this is the most advanced topic, Buddha nature. He said, I don't know if Western lay people are going to connect with this one bit because of his Tibetan experience. This is only for the few who've studied all the other things and then get to this, how can you say, crown jewel of the teachings. And then him, and then after him, Trungpa Rinpoche and other great teachers, they said, this is amazing. In the West, people connect with these Buddha nature teachings. It was quite fascinating to see these great teachers discovering the pros and the cons of the Western mind. And so there were lots of good points and lots of bad points. And some of them, they were quite mind-blown because they've been teaching Tibetans all their life. And now they have this new audience of people with in many ways, a good education, an active mind, an analytical mind, a mind that seeks to organize information, find out the truth, and so on and so on. It was fascinating. But you should know that what we're studying here in Tibet, and in that kind of Buddhism, and if we go back to the Indian Buddhism it was based on, it was studied as the cream of the cream by the few. So the vision of enlightenment, the stages of the path, it's very privileged teaching. Even within Mahayana, we have Nagarjuna who set the ground, but then a couple of centuries later, Asanga, Maitreya's teaching that really took that forward and showed the absolute necessity of understanding the journey through the bodhisattva levels, because then it all makes such sense. When you see how gradually the mind can become totally pure. So that's long. It's what I want to contribute to these teachings from my own experience, but not just my experience, from what my teachers have shared with me. So now we need to get to the text. And last week we looked at the 7 main sections of this chapter on enlightenment. So now we pick up on verse 170 on page 188. Okay, we're on the high diving board. Take a deep breath. We're about to make a big triple somersault and dive into the water of enlightenment. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, bang. That which has been described as its nature is lucid clarity is like the sun and space, obscured by the thick veils of those multitude of clouds which are merely incidental. The defilements and the cognitive obscuration. Buddhahood has no stain. It is endowed with Buddha qualities and is permanent, everlasting, and without change. Its achievement, now this is the second section of this verse, its achievement depends upon non-conceptual jhana and analytical jhana regarding all phenomena. So as you can see from the titles, from the Tibetan structural analysis of Asanga's text, we have the first 2 points: the nature of enlightenment, the nature of enlightenment. What is it? Its essential characteristic. What really is the nature, what this thing, enlightenment, we're talking about? What's its nature? And then the second point, what causes it to happen? They are taken together. So we're back to something we looked at a lot in the Buddha nature teachings, which is a result by removal. Not a result that's created, but a result by removal. That's why we had the 9 examples and all that Buddha nature chapter. The gold is there in the ore. It's there. But it will only become useful gold, shiny gold, gold you can make into things, if you remove the rock, the ore. And then all those 9 examples we had showed result by removal, where the process that's necessary for the result doesn't make the result. We don't make the gold. The gold's there all the time, but we take away the rock. The honey is there all the time, but we remove the bees. The grain is there all the time, but we take away the husk. A result by removal, not a result that we create. So it means all of our Buddhist path doesn't create enlightenment, doesn't create the enlightened qualities, doesn't create enlightened activity. It's there, right now, all the time. What we do is take away what's blocking it. That's what this voice is saying. So now let's explore it without rushing. That which has been described as its nature is lucid, oops, lost my place. That which has been described as. So this means in the Buddha's own teachings, been described as what? Now we have a language issue. That which has been described as, we don't know. Because the original Sanskrit of this text has been lost. It's been reconstituted from translations. But that which has been described as, now the reconstituted translation is Prabhashvara. Prabha means light. And Shvara means, in this case, light which is clear. So this is a back translation from the Tibetan Wu-sal, which translators, not me, but other translators translate as clear light. Not a good translation. When you see clear light in texts, stop, think. So it could have been that the original Sanskrit was not Prabhashvara, the back translation from Wursal, but something like spasta. Spasta, the Sanskrit word, is what this means. And we have a word in English. It's perfect. I don't know why translators don't use it. But so the text says, that which has been described as lucidity. The word English, the English word, lucidity comes from the Latin lux, which means light. So now, very clearly, our teachers, Trungpa Rinpoche, who taught all of our Kagyu masters in Romtek, explains it very clearly. Wursal, which is translated as clear light, is nothing to do with light. It's all to do with clear, clarity. The clarity of wisdom. Everything's clear. You are lucid. And this is the word in English. So the explanation from Trungpa Rinpoche, from all of our teachers, is as clear as when a bright light shines. We're looking at everyday examples. When it's dim, when it's dark, things aren't clear. When it's really dark, you haven't got a clue. When you're in the dark, you don't know. So, like to thread a needle, you go close to the light, then you can see the thread, you can see the hole in the needle. You can thread it. As clear as when a bright light shines, but the whole point is about clarity, lucidity. There is no doubt, there is no confusion, things aren't dim, not sure. So if I can share a personal example, and those of you who've been with my teachings, you know this one back to front. It struck me, it's my first retreat when I took refuge. When I took refuge, our Rinpoche said, I give you refuge, but you have to take 7-day retreat to appreciate what you've done afterwards. So I was in a tiny garden shed by the river in Samiling for 7 days. And one night, one dark night, I decided I'd go out and get a breath of fresh air. Now this hut was next to the river. So I went out and got lost in the dark on the riverbank. It had been raining, it was muddy, it was slippery, there were bushes, there were brambles. So I should never have gone out that door, but within about 10 meters, I'd slid, got dirty, got scratched, and had to find my way back in the dark to my hut. It was quite an adventure. And I went out the next morning when the sun was shining and could see in that bright light these 10, 15 meters where I'd been in the dark, I'd made a mess of myself, I'd done something stupid. You can see the bushes and the mud and everything, crystal clear, no doubt. I wouldn't have had any of those problems had the light been shining. So for me, this was my number one experiential example, as clear as when a bright light shines, and the opposite, as confusing and as dangerous as when there's no light and you're in the dark and just struggling your way through. It's all about this, your wisdom, the lucidity, the clarity that wisdom brings. So this is our first line of this verse, that which has been described as lucidity, clarity. Now this term becomes a big deal in our Kagyu tradition. In the Nimapa tradition, many of you have read texts, you'll know that something that in Tibetan is Rikpa is a big deal. You see, Rikpa is, they talk about it a lot. The equivalent in the Kagyu tradition is Usal, translated often as clear light, but it means lucidity, clarity. Whichever one you like, clarity, lucidity. But if you say clear light, then you're thinking about light. And that's not really what this is about. It's about wisdom. It's about knowing. Not knowledge, wisdom. Wisdom that comes through experience. The wisdom that's in your hands if you're a masseur. The wisdom that's just in your knowing if you're a gardener. You know what to do when, because you've been gardening for 30, 40 years, and you just know how much to do, what to do, when to do it. You just know. This kind of wisdom. So here we're looking at the wisdom that's acquired through the 10 bodhisattva levels, where you are crystal clear. Nothing to do with experiences of light. You can have experiences of light and mental clarity long, long before your bodhisattva levels. That's easy. We're not talking about light. We're talking about wisdom. So that which has been described as, well, whatever it was described as, Wussel, Spasta. Its nature is lucid clarity, is like the sun and space, is like the sun and space. So, enlightenment is like the sun and space. What's actually being referred to here, we have Sanskrit words for Dharmakaya, Dhammadhatu. Dharmakaya is like the sun, Dhammadhatu is like space, and enlightenment is like the two together. Spacious and perfectly illuminated. In terms of mind, the space in which everything and anything happens, from heaven to hell, any of the 6 realms of existence, anything, anywhere, anytime that can happen, happens in this space of mind. Enlightenment is about that space, all pervading, everywhere, no limits. And within that space is the light of wisdom, throughout all that space. So the wisdom is Dharma Kaya, the space is Dhammadhatu. And when you get to the 10th, the end of the 10th bodhisattva level, every trace of what could block off the light, limit or spoil the wisdom, is gone. So that takes us into the next part of the verse. It's like the sun and space, which before enlightenment is obscured by the thick veils of those multitudes of clouds, clouds in quotation marks, which are merely incidental. This word incidental is translated these days various ways. Adventitious is one of the words you come across a lot. It means something that comes and goes and can't affect the original. Something that comes and goes and can't affect the original. Incidental, passing, transient, the term has that feeling. So clouds, they're perfect. The sun's light is always there. It's great these days, we've got aeroplanes. You can go up and go above the clouds anytime. And you look down and you see on the ground that where there's clouds, they stop the light from getting in. They make it dark, very, very dark. Even you take a night flight and you can see how part of the earth is in the dark, part of it's in the light because the earth turns round. But the light's always there. The clouds, although for people on the ground they affect the light, they don't actually affect the light. They don't stop the sun from shining. It'll shine all the time. And when the clouds go, however much the clouds go, the light's there. It's always been there. The clouds cannot damage the light itself. The light's always there. But locally, the coming and going of the clouds is very important. It's pouring down with rain, it's dark, it's miserable, or it's bright and sunny. Locally, it's very important. So the clouds, what are the clouds? The defilements, the mind poisons, which come and go, and which cause karma, which comes and goes. That's our clouds, our experience, the good times, the bad times. Karma, through karma. Friends, enemies, good health, poor health, war, peace. The whole play of karma, created because of our actions, because of anger, because of love. We have good karma, bad karma. All of that. And why all of that? Because of dualistic thinking, duality, dualistic projections, which are called the cognitive obscuration here. The obscuration to real wisdom, real knowledge, is our dualistic mind, our own personal version of things, me and the world, me and others. It's called the cognitive obscuration, dualistic thinking. So Buddhahood, I'm quoting him here, has no stain, no defilements, all gone. The worst of them gone by the first bodhisattva level. No dualistic thinking, the power of duality gone at seventh bodhisattva level. And then the third obscuration not mentioned here, historical blockages to meditative power, meditation blockages, also gone. So Buddhahood has none of those stains, and it's endowed with the Buddha qualities. When you get to it, it's always been there. It's permanent, everlasting, without change. The changeless nature, that's what we call it. It's like the sunlight. When you go above the clouds, it's always been there. Wonderful. Go up in an aeroplane into the land of constant sunshine. Weather's what happens down there. You're beyond weather. And it's always been like that. I mean, relatively speaking, this is an example. It's not a perfect example because we know the sun will burn out and all the rest of it. But in terms of human history, that sun's always been shining. Never stopped. And that sunlight has been streaming out of it in space. It's only when we get beyond the clouds we realize That's always been like that. And when we go back down on the plain lands, you go down through the clouds and the bumpiness, and then you're in the dark on the ground and it's pouring down with rain and you need your umbrella to get to the terminal. It's just a memory of the land of constant sunshine up there. Sometimes we have peak experiences in meditation. It's also so much clearer. You think it's always going to be like that, and you've been liberated. And then a year later, you're back down on the ground. So Buddhahood is what has no stain, permanent, everlasting, without change. So that's about the nature of Buddhahood, that changeless, timeless purity beyond the coming and going of karma, cause and effect, mind poisons and so on. All of that is what is called adventitious, transient, passing, incidental. There is a technical term in Western philosophy, which is quite funny as a word, accidental. It has the same meaning. It doesn't affect what it temporarily obscures. It doesn't affect the actual nature. So anyway, that's about the nature of enlightenment, and then its achievement. Okay, that's wonderful. How do you achieve it? What is the cause? Depends upon non-conceptual jhana and analytical jhana regarding all phenomena. All phenomena, or any phenomenon. It's the same thing. All phenomena means any phenomenon. I don't know if our mind can encompass all phenomena. That's a lot, and so many of what we call phenomena are beyond our reach. It's like those Horsehead Nebula that's in a part of the spectrum our eyes will never see. We've got these wonderful pictures of what looks like a horsehead in space, but it's in another part of the spectrum. Only machines can see it like that. We'll never see it like that. So all phenomena doesn't make much sense, actually. We can only know that we'll never know it. What it really means is any phenomenon. Whatever the mind is focused on, it's clear. There's no confusion. There's no dualistic projection. There's no emotional reaction of possessivity, of upsetness, or all of that. There is just total clarity. So its achievement depends on the two types of jhana that we cultivate in meditation. Eventually. We start from today. Our meditation practice has two objectives. When you sit on your cushion, we have what is called what happens in the session and post-meditation. So in our session of profound meditation, we are working towards a recognition of the nature of mind. Those of you studying Mahamudra, doing their foundations and other practices, know that we do the foundation practices. We cultivate shamatha to have a totally peaceful mind. And within that peace, we develop vipassana insight with our guru's help. So when we sit on the cushion, we are working towards understanding who we are, what our mind is, the nature of mind. What Dharmakaya is, what shunyata, voidness is. That's called meditation time work. And then post-meditation, because of that, then when we get up off the cushion and we're back in the world of life, phenomena, then it helps us understand how things happen like a dream. They're illusory. There's so much based on our own projections and so on. All of that is so much easier to understand because of our quiet work, exploring the nature of mind. So, in our practice today, and as we develop our Buddhist Bodhisattva practice, we are developing two aspects of awareness. Which eventually will become the two aspects of jhana. But are not jhana today. I can't speak for everybody here. I can only speak for myself and probably most of us. But if you had jhana, you wouldn't be hearing Ken's talk. You'd be sitting in it and you'd be a yogi somewhere. You wouldn't need these teachings. Jhana is this pure mind. We're talking about Buddha mind. The word jhana only refers to that. So when we practice Mahamudra, we do the shamatha, vipassana, you get to the pointing out of the nature of mind from your guru, and then you renew and make that experience more full. Then you have jhana. And when you have it, you're at the equivalent of first bodhisattva level. So what we're doing now on the cushion to cultivate shunyata, and through that what we do off the cushion to understand the illusory nature of life, that's very, very, very important work, but we can't call it jhana yet. No, I wanted to stop at 11:45, but I can't stop here because we're up in midair, and I need to finish this line of thought. Be very careful. There are lots of Dharma teachers out there who don't know what they're talking about and who confuse the observing mind in mindfulness, in shamatha, the stillness, the quietness that knows, with jhana. It's not. It's part of our, what we call consciousness, vijnana. So there are very important teachings, and we've done a course on them in the last few years, distinguishing vijnana, consciousness, from jhana, primordial wisdom. So when I sit, I can only talk about me, I don't know about your meditation. And if I'm sitting and it's a good session, my mind is very, very quiet. And it feels like space, in which things are happening. So there is happening and an awareness of the happening. That is vijnana, is part of dualistic consciousness. It's a wonderful tool to work with. We develop it through mindfulness, we develop it in all sorts of ways. But the quiet, observing mind, although it might feel clear, clarity, that which is referred to as clarity, it might feel like clarity. It's not what's being talked about as clarity in this verse. Clarity is Buddha's awareness, the changeless, timeless, total clarity, in which there are not the clouds of duality. So when I see, and I won't mention any names, whether they be Tibetans or Westerners, when I see some modern Dharma teachers talking about shamatha and talking about the observer and the clarity of the observing mind and so on, it seems to me they get terribly mixed up between vijnana and jhana. So coming back to our studies of this verse, it says the cause for reaching enlightenment is developing the two aspects of jhana, of wisdom, on the cushion, the non-conceptual jhana, and off the cushion, the jhana that understands, or the wisdom that understands everything clearly. That's all we do for today. There's so much more that comes out of this, and that we need to understand really in dialogue with our own meditation teachers, so that we understand more clearly what's going on in our meditation practice. But just now we're looking at this particular verse. So anything that was good today, let's dedicate it. May whatever virtue was created by this session contribute to the state of omniscience, enlightenment, being attained by the main enemy, mind's defilements, being completely defeated. Through that, may each and every sentient being become freed from the ocean of existence, troubled by the waves of rebirth, aging, sickness, and death. May this precious bodhicitta arise in those in whom it's not yet arisen. In those in whom it has arisen, may its development know no setbacks. May it increase ever more and more. Through this virtue, may we quickly achieve Mahamudra and establish every single sentient being in that same accomplishment. So thank you all very much for your patience, your listening, your thinking and digesting of all of this. Your turn now.
And about jhana and jhana, do you give like a very away from meditation, say an example of the difference between them, like a Dhammist guide?
Everything we know is vijnana. It's the play of our consciousness. We won't know jhana until we break through to Buddha mind. However long that takes, however it happens, we won't even have a clue. And we've seen already in this text, I think it was already, it says, it has not one atom in common, jhana, Buddha's clarity, Buddha awareness, not one atom in common with this consciousness, which is what all of our experience at the moment. It says this is why no example from our experience can ever give us a clue about Buddha clarity. So the only way we can get jhana is through meditation practice, and usually these days by following a course of meditation practice up to the point where sitting with our guru, we're ready to experience this Buddha mind for the first time. And that is a very, very amazing moment. But everything we experience, everything is vijnana. It's the play of our consciousness. And within that, there's wonderful states of clarity, of peace, of insight in many, many, many ways. So that's why the 5 stages of the path are important. The first 2 stages are what we can go through as we become, I don't know what you call it, pure, saintly, while we're still human, before jhana happens. Wonderful accomplishments. And when jhana happens in the bodhisattva path, this long, slow, systematic journey is once and for all, is point of no return. In Vajrayana, where we go quickly, it will be an experience with your guru, and you'll come down from that experience, and you'll have to return to it, and come down from it, and return to it, until you get to a point where it becomes, it's a kind of a flip over, and it becomes our default. Buddha mind becomes our default state. And our history becomes observed, let's say, to put it in very gross terms. But I can't put it any better than that.
Thank you. It was much clearer. Is alaya vijnana something different?
Alaya vijnana, alaya is one aspect of vijnana, our consciousness, which is where all the memory and the karma is stored. It's called storehouse, it's consciousness. Alaya means a basic basis. It's like a ground in which there are all the seeds of our karma. It's like a ground, where seeds haven't come up yet, but they're there. So alaya means ground, or sometimes it's called storehouse. It's just one aspect of vijnana. So vijnana consciousness has, in Mahayana, 8 aspects, 5 sense consciousnesses, the distorting consciousness in 2 aspects, and then storehouse consciousness.
Okay, so anything with alaya, and so alaya jhana, for example, is part of the consciousnesses.
Alaya vijnana, yeah.
Is there alaya jhana as well?
Not really, no. Because when vijnana is gone, it's gone. There's nothing but Buddha mind.
So jhana, in short, is basically what only a Buddha can know.
Which only, no, there is, from the first bodhisattva level onwards, there's something of jhana. It's not complete. So that's why the example given is light and dawn. So in the night, it's dark. And then you get pre-dawn light, which is light. So as we go through the 5 stages of the path, as we're working through stage 2, that's like pre-dawn light. It's light, but you don't see the sun yet. The source of the light. We've got some of the, how can you say, results of the light. We see things more clearly as the pre-dawn light is there, but we don't yet have awareness of where all that light's coming from. First bodhisattva level is like the sun popping over the horizon. So there is some direct Buddha mind, but it's limited. It's not the full extent of Buddha mind. So that gets better and better. We have to use several examples. No example, one example works. So then we switch. The example that's given is the light experienced by a newborn baby, first bodhisattva level. You've been in the womb. That's the second of the 5 stages of the path. And then at the end of all that work, you're born and you experience light. I suppose these days it's in a maternity ward, the light of the neon light of a maternity ward through a baby's newly opened eyes. That's light. After that, light's light. But as you grow up, as a baby, as a child, as an adult, you will see so many aspects of light. It's all light, but the full extent. So what we're talking about is wisdom here. That's all examples. The wisdom on the first bodhisattva level is true wisdom. But as these things described as clouds, whatever's left of the defilements and duality, as they disappear through the bodhisattva levels, that wisdom will get deeper and vaster and eventually become the full Buddha's wisdom. So this chapter, actually, Enlightenment, is about the 100% full deal Buddha wisdom. That's what we mean by enlightenment.
Thank you.
And then it's because of that first bodhisattva level is sometimes called Buddhahood. It's confusing, but it's an enlightenment because the wisdom is authentic. It won't change from then onwards. It will just get deeper and vaster, more implications. Excuse my clock.
Hi, Ken.
Neil?
If you pardon the pun, I think one of the most illuminating things you said today was that clear light has nothing to do with light, only with clarity.
Yeah.
I mean, last week we talked about the inadequacy, if that's the term, of the terms enlightenment and Buddha nature, and I think clear light is another one. I mean, in several descriptions of the stages of death, the last 4 are often given as white light, red light, black light, or blackness, and then clear light. And I think that use of clear light, it gives a completely false idea to people. Yeah.
Yeah. It's So the definition is very, very clear. I mean, Trangu Rinpoche, he really insisted on this. It's as clear as when a bright light shines. It's just the light bit isn't only for the example. So lucidity is the word. I mean, one is 100% lucid. There's no more confusion, mix-up, nothing obscures. Totally lucid.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, Ken.
Hello, Ken.
Could I ask you a question that relates to, actually it's verse 4, and it's just a word in it, which is the word, well, if I give you the phrase, wielding the supreme sword and vajra of knowledge and compassionate love. The word knowledge always jarred with me slightly because I thought it should be wisdom. Can you say something about that?
Let me think of the Tibetan Kangi Lodro Dribne Dintra. Yeah, I mean, it should be wisdom. That will be a better translation. But when we do Manjushri practice, it's particularly the practice we do when we're studying. And the road to wisdom involves knowledge. Like just now, I'm going blah, blah, blah for an hour and a half, and you're listening. That's knowledge. You know, it's ideas, it's conceptual, it's intellectual. I'm talking about stuff that really happens through meditation, through our own Dharma path. But basically, I'm just blurting out ideas which make some sense to you. So the journey to the real wisdom is very clearly explained as involving first things first. Let's get our ideas straight. You know, as long as we're going to be thinking, let's think in accord with the Buddha's teaching, in accord with what makes sense, what corresponds to reality. We have 3 criteria in that area of knowledge development, you know, what accords with the Buddha's teaching, which logically makes sense, and which accords with experience. So as long as we're going to be thinking at all, let us think, right thought, clear thought. So that knowledge gets, the main point is to get rid of our confused and wrong thinking that just doesn't correspond to reality, doesn't correspond to the Buddha's teaching, doesn't survive the test of is this true. So the purpose of right thought is to get rid of wrong thought, confused thinking, limited thinking, and to help us go beyond thinking altogether. And
so in a way, knowledge is sort of a process, really, and wisdom is more of a state.
It's the result, yes, the outcome.
Yeah.
It's the outcome. You see that in life. We learn our lessons, we learn. I gave earlier on the example of gardening or a masseur. You have to learn the principles, you have to, well, let's not take a masseur. Let me take what Khenpo Tsenam told us about pulse taking in Tibetan medicine. He said, in my experience, a Tibetan doctor needs to have taken the pulses of at least 10,000 people before they really get it. Right? So at first you understand the principles. You have 3 fingers and each finger takes 2 pulses. So you've got 6 with the right hand and 6 with the left hand. You're taking 12 pulses on your patient. So you have to learn, you know, this is the liver, this is the heart, this is this is that. And then you have to experience it with about 10,000 people, and then you can do what he was doing, which, my God, it was so powerful. He's tuning into the person. And what happened with his translators, when you're sitting next to him, You're just a translator, but you start feeling that person's illness. You're like, I don't know if you've ever taken a tuning fork and put it on a piano or a guitar, and what was a little becomes amplified. When you're the translator for the doctor, you start feeling the person's kidneys or their heart or what's going wrong. It's quite disturbing because the doctor is so tuned in. And I remember they took Dr. Yeshidundan around a hospital in America, and they just got him to take the pulses of the patients along with the specialists who were treating those patients to see how accurate he was. And they were quite, amazed because he tuned in. But that's very much the difference between training, acquiring knowledge, acquiring experience, and at the end, you got it. You're there, you've got the wisdom that comes through the first training, the first learning, lots and lots of experience.
Ken, is that what's meant by the fruits of wisdom, like the fruit, how they have that word, the fruits of knowledge or wisdom?
Yeah, I think when it comes to Manjushri practice, it's what we used to do when we were studying. Every session, you do the Manjushri prayer, and the whole reason you're doing the prayer and the practice is to help you study well. So although you're aiming for wisdom, and for you Manjushri embodies the Buddha's wisdom, you actually know that without right knowledge and study and deep reflection on that study, you're never going to get it. So I think knowledge is okay in that translation. And first things first, we want to get our knowledge straight, like we're doing here.
Ken?
Ken
Locke?
Yeah.
Hi. I was wondering, when you were teaching earlier, there's a verse in the Mahamudra prayer that comes up, and I'll put it in chat because I have a bad Wi-Fi connection. But that first line, especially where it says, it doesn't exist, even Buddhas do not see it. It doesn't not exist. It's the origin of samsara and nirvana.
Mm-hmm.
No, okay, that especially those first two lines. Could you elaborate on that a little more?
Yeah. The whole meaning's in the it. Right? So what's this it we're talking about? Okay. When you get to Buddha mind, for instance, when you get to the pointing out with the guru, whatever happens there isn't an it, so we call it it. Sorry, it makes no sense. But when the pointing out happens, you realize there is no Buddha nature as opposed to something else. There is no Dharmacharya, which is different from everything else. There is no Mahamudra, which is Mahamudra. It is whatever happens in that moment. So then, imagine you're in that pointing out. If we say it or this, there's nothing to be shown. There's no thing to be shown with, boom, now you got it. Even the Buddhas haven't found an it, a God, a something that you can say, that's it, as opposed to other things. But whatever you're experiencing in that moment of Buddha mind with your guru, it shows you where all of samsara and nirvana comes from your mind, the nature of which you're experiencing as Buddhas experience it. So that's why we use the word it, because anything else would be too this as opposed to that. So this, that's why we use the word Tathagata, who became that, who became this thing which is only known when the mind is awakened. So it's not, the point is, it's not a something. In the short prayer to Vajradhara, it's there's an amazing verse. It says, this is, there's nothing to be shown, yet it's the basis for all of samsara and nirvana. So, don't know what else to say. I mean, what could I say that would? If I said anything, it would be in contradiction with that verse you just, Even Buddhas haven't got a this, that they've got it and we've not got it. That's why Taisutapa, he says, this is called pointing out, but it's ridiculous. Because what are you pointing to? If there was something to be pointed to, then the word pointing out would make sense. It's that. It's not this, it's that. He said, that's what people translate it as, but I can't point you to.
Ken, is it a little bit like the Tao that can't be named, the Tao, the way?
Yeah, it can't be named.
Yeah, that's a different tradition.
Can't be thought.
But maybe.
Yeah, but it's. I think you find this in lots of traditions. It's not just in Buddhism.
Yeah.
It's in Sufism.
Mm.
I can't speak for the Tao, but certainly can't be named, can't be thought, because we can only name and think with our vijnana, our consciousness.
Yeah. That makes sense. Thank you.
Can't be named because naming it is dualistic.
Yeah, I mean, names, we have to understand what names are. Names are the names, the words we give to our experience within this world of vijnana. None of our names could ever work. We need to understand the naming process to understand why we can't. A name is a word applied to something we experience in thought. And because we can't think it, then as a secondary result, we can't name it. That's why we've got words like it and that and thusness and isness and words that mean nothing.
Because when you use a word, then you make a definition.
Yeah.
A definition cannot exist in a dualistic mind.
Yeah.
That's how I understand it.
Yeah. So we can only experience it. That's why, in the actual teachings, they say like, imagine somebody who never tasted sweetness. We have to imagine it, because I think we've all tasted sweetness. Although there are some parts of the world where sweets are quite rare things. Like for Tibetans, they didn't generally eat sweets. But imagine, so all they've ever tasted is like salty, sour, hot, like hot chili pepper, the other tastes. So they say, well, is it like salty? I say, no. Well, like chili then? No. So the only thing you can do is put a sweet in their mouth and say it's like this. Right? And then that's like nothing they've ever, it's, sweet. Then they're hooked to Mars bars. But anyway, before that, they never had that experience. So the only way we can experience Buddha mind is by meditating, making our mind quiet, shamatha. Within that quietness, getting the instructions, examining within the quietness the nature of mind until we get to the point where everything's ready, just like putting the sweet in our mouth. We have to experience it directly. No words, none of our past experience can bring us anywhere near it. We have to do it ourselves, and even Buddhas can't do it for us. They can just show us what to do with ourselves, with our minds, until we get to a point where they can help us. Help us help ourselves. They can't even give us the experience. So when it comes to pointing out the nature of mind, no matter how hard a guru tries, for some people it doesn't work, and they have to send them back on their cushion and try again and try again. And for some people, when the moment's right, then that's it. It's like putting the sweet in the mouth. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you all very much. And what are we today? 16th. Yeah, see you next week. Okay.
Thank
Take
you,
good
Ken.
care. Bye-bye,
Bye,
everybody.
Ken.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
Ken.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.